Hi, this is the second part of the screencast series about Mistral 0.1, workflow service for OpenStack clouds. In this part, we're going to talk more about how to create Mistral direct workflows, and we will create a little bit more complicated example of the workflow than in the previous screencast. Before we start writing our workflow, let's make sure our Mistral server is up and running. And let's make sure we can use command line interface. Okay. Let's now open up a text editor and write up our workflow. The idea of today's workflow is fairly simple. It will be gathering some basic statistics about OpenStack tenant and sending it by email. These statistics will include total number of virtual machines in the cloud, number of active virtual machines in the cloud, and number of networks. Okay, let's start. Standard YAML marker and version of DSL. And let's call our workflow send tenant stat. And the workflow type is going to be direct. So direct workflow means that we may have a set of tasks and all the workflow is based on direct transition. So it's when basically when we run the first task and based on its result we can actually make some decision what other task should be running next. Let's describe workflow input and output. Our input workflow parameters are going to be to email address, from email address, SMTP server, and SMTP password so that we can send an email. And the output of the workflow is going to be VM count variable, which is basically the number of virtual machines in the cloud, right? So an active VM count and net count, which is the number of networks in the cloud. So let's not define all of these variables right now. We'll figure out that later. Now we will define the workflow tasks. And the tasks will be get VM count, get net count, and send stat. So this is the skeleton of our workflow. So the first two tasks are going to gather all required statistics. And the third one is going to send the statistics by email. Alright, so let's now define how each task should work. Get VM count, first of all, will be associated with action nova servers list, which just basically returns the full list of virtual machines in the cloud, in the tenant actually. And the task is going to publish two variables into workflow context, which are VM count and active VM count. Okay. And now we need to specify what's going to happen next right after this task is completed. And let's use the keyword onComplete. And here we can specify a list of tasks that should run next. In our case, it will be just get net count. Here is how we define transitions between tasks in direct workflows. And along with onComplete handler, we also have handlers onSuccess and onError. For example, if we use onSuccess handler, then all of the listed tasks will run only if this task has completed successfully. If we use onError, then all of the listed tasks will run only if the task has finished with an error. And onComplete actually means that all of the listed tasks will run in either case. It's also worth noting that if we have multiple tasks in these handlers, then Mistral can scale the whole process execution and run these tasks in parallel using different underlying computing resources, physical or virtual machines. And now we need to define how we calculate variables VM count and active VM count. So we're going to use YACL expressions here, where basically a $sign means the result of the action, and length function just returns the size of this array, of this list, right? So, and probably the most interesting place here is how we calculate the number of active VMs. So this is the example of so-called expression with a predicate. So here is basically the predicate saying that we are only interested in virtual machines whose status is active here. And eventually we apply the same function length. Let's go to the next task, get net count, and mostly we can use what we already did for get VM count. Okay, so the action will be neutron list networks, which is a little bit funny because here the action name ends with list and here the action name starts with list, but that's how these services are designed. So, and there will be just one variable that we need to publish in this task, net count, and it works just the same way as in the previous case. Okay, and once this task completes, we finally need to send the whole statistics via email. And finally, let's describe the task sendstat. Its action will be std email, which is the standard Mistral action for sending emails. And let's describe the input parameters of this action. Okay. It actually has two parameters, params and settings. Settings contains things like from, SMTP server, and password. Params contains things like to, subject, and body. So let's fill in all this data. So to contains a list of recipients, which is in our case just two, email, just one element, which is defined as a workflow input parameter here. Okay, so subject will be something like tenant statistics, okay, and body something like statistics for tenant, and here we can actually specify the tenant name. And let's use our inline YACL expressions and our predefined OpenStack related data placed in the workflow context. OpenStack project name. Okay. And number of VMs. Again, our inline expression here. VM count. Alright, so number of active VMs, active, and number of networks, which is net count that we calculated right here in this task. Okay, and something like that. Alright, so from email is going to be from email parameter from our workflow input defined here, and SMTP server and SMTP password. Okay, and one thing that is left is that we need to specify these output variables, which are going to be just VM count from our workflow context, active VM count, and net count. Okay, looks like our workflow is ready, and let's start it. And now I'm going to upload my workflow into Mistral using Mistral workflow create command. And I need to specify my YAML file containing my workflow definition, and that's it. Okay, it's been uploaded now, so let's start it. Execution create, and this time I need to specify my workflow name. And in this particular case, since the workflow has some input parameters, I also need to specify the JSON file containing all of the parameters. I already have this file prepared. Okay, Mistral says my execution is running, and here is the server output, and the last task in the workflow is actually in success state already, and I'm supposed to receive an email pretty soon. Okay, let's take a look at my inbox. Alright, so we have 24 virtual machines in our tenant and 18 active and 1 network. Let's now try to terminate a VM and relaunch our workflow so that we can see how our statistic changed. Okay, it looks like it's been deleted, and let's just relaunch our workflow. Okay. And again, it's successful, and let's take a look at my inbox once again. Alright, so we now have 21 virtual machine in the tenant and 17 active. Great. Thank you very much for watching, and please see the other screencasts from this series.